Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Truthout Interviews. I'm Ted Asregadoo, and my returning guest is Victoria Law, who has written about prisons and prison life and is here to weigh in on the current hunger strike at Pelican Bay State Prison in California. Hey, thanks for being on the program again, Victoria.
Thanks for having me.
First off, why are the prisoners at Pelican Bay Prison in California on this hunger strike? What are the reasons why they are striking like this?
Over 500 people have spent 10 years or more than 10 years in solitary confinement. So that means that they've been confined to 7 by 11 foot cells with no windows and perforated steel doors and face a concrete wall. And they spend 22 to 23 and a half hours every day there. And to be placed in the SHU, the security house, which is short for the security housing unit, people are either placed there for a fixed term because they broke a prison rule, they assaulted someone, they were caught with contraband, or they're placed there indefinitely on allegations of either being associated with a prison gang or being a member in a prison gang. And these allegations rely on circumstantial evidence a lot of times, such as having certain books like Black history books or Mexican history books, having certain drawings or tattoos, being seen talking with people who are also alleged gang members, signing a group petition can be used as evidence. And if someone informs on you and says that you are a gang member, you are not able to find out what the actual accusation is, who the person is who is pointing their finger at you as a gang member, and you don't have a way to rebut this evidence. So a lot of people who are on hunger strike and have called for the hunger strike have been in the SHU based on a lot of these charges because of either circumstantial evidence or confidential informants.
On the surface, being locked up in solitary confinement or the security housing units for an indefinite period of time does look like cruel and inhumane punishment. And for what you were saying earlier, in many cases, it very well is. It is, absolutely. But however, as the prison officials at Pelican Bay State Prison have noted, the prisoners in these facilities, in this facility itself, in this particular prison, are the worst of the worst. These are some who are involved in organized crime at very high levels and are directing their underlings from behind the prison walls to engage in further drug trafficking or engage in gang warfare. And so one of the methods that prison officials have used to thwart this ability of organized crime leaders to communicate with their minions, if you will, is to lock them up in solitary. It cuts them off from the outside world. So on the one hand, you've got this method that's being used, as solitary confinement, as arbitrary punishment. And then on the other hand, you have prison officials who are saying, we're actually using them for legitimate purposes for thwarting organized crime efforts. But what you're finding out is that it's not necessarily the case, that it is arbitrary for a number of prisoners who are put into solitary confinement.
Yes. So I actually received a letter from one prisoner who had been in the SHU for over a decade. And this past fall, the California Department of Corrections actually released its new step-down program, which said that they were going to start reviewing people who are in the SHU and for gang-related charges, and to find out whether or not they were eligible to step down from being in the SHU. So they started with people who they labeled gang associates. And the person who wrote me this letter said, over 10 years ago, and I'm saying over 10 years ago because I don't necessarily want to land him in hot water for talking about his case, I was accused of being a gang associate based on things like having a drawing, having a birthday card, and an informant, a confidential informant, fingered me as being part of a prison gang. And so when I was told I would be placed in the SHU, I wasn't given a chance to challenge any of this evidence or challenge this information. So he asked, well, I would like to be placed in a non-gang affiliated yard. I am not part of a prison gang. I don't want to be in a gang yard. And instead he was placed in a gang yard. And he said that because nothing happened to him prison officials then said, well, this is obviously proof that you were in a gang because we placed you in the housing unit where other alleged members of your alleged gang are being housed. And you weren't attacked, you weren't assaulted, nothing happened to you. So therefore, you must be part of this gang. Well, fast forward more than 10 years later, where he's been sitting in this box for 22 to 24 hours a day for over a decade of his life. And the step down program comes around, and he's actually one of the first group to be hauled before the step down classification committee. And they said, well, we've basically looked over your records and we're finding that you aren't associated with a gang and you can be in the step down program, and we're releasing you directly to general population under the step down program. So we're not even saying that you have to go through the first 4 steps in this program, which is reflecting and renouncing your gang membership and going through these different processes. We're just putting you into a general population yard in a different prison. So for him, he said, or he wrote to me, well, isn't this proof then that I was never part of a gang if you're willing to release me? And then what does that mean that I've spent over 10 years of my life in this tiny little box in solitary confinement based on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of somebody that I was never able to challenge? And so the California Department of Corrections has been releasing people. And I think that this says something about the fact that their original explanation of this being the worst of the worst, these monsters that are going to traffic in drugs and assault people and wreak all sorts of havoc, is actually false.
Did the step down program, was that initiated from the first hunger strike that occurred, was it two or 3 years ago? Or 2 years ago? Was this something that has always been a program within the prison system, the Pelican Bay prison system?
The step down program was released or launched by the California Department of Corrections last fall, so fall of 2012. And when I asked the Department of Corrections spokespeople if this was in response to the hunger strikes, they said that this had been in the works before the hunger strikes. When I asked the hunger strikers about this step down program, they said that this is a result of their being on hunger strike the first time around. So they were negotiating with the Department of Corrections, and they actually offered what they called, I think it was called the Max Security Plan, which was in place in the California prison system in the 1970s, which actually allowed people to be in these security housing units, but without the sort of draconian punishment. So they were still allowed to participate in programs, and there was a way to get out of them that didn't rely on informing on other people or pointing the finger at other potential gang members or alleged gang members. So up until the fall of 2012 in the step-down program, the only way to be released from the SHU was to either die or to inform on someone else.
The step-down program, and you may have explained it earlier, but maybe you could take us through what exactly, how that is different, or what the process is versus debriefing. Now, debriefing was something where they want you to essentially identify gang members by, as probably they would put it in prison terms, by snitching on people, by saying, yeah, that person is a gang member. And the step down program is different. It's almost it's a rewards based system, isn't it?
I think that the way that the Department of Corrections characterizes the step down program is that it's a program in which they evaluate your behavior. And you don't necessarily, according to the Department of Corrections, you don't necessarily have to give up your gang, renounce your gang membership, or even admit to being in a prison gang to be eligible for the step down program. Well, one of the interesting things, too, is that when before the hunger strike started, the Department of Corrections said that this would in no way impact their review of alleged gang associates and gang members for the step-down program. So keep in mind that steps 1 and 2 of the step-down program are you still spend time in security housing unit, and you have to fill out workbooks and reflections, which both advocates and people imprisoned in the SHU have said are very patronizing and very demeaning. And they said, well, if we've been in here for 5 years, for 10 years, for 15 years, for 20 years, why are you keeping us still in solitary confinement in step 1 of the step down program. And there's no guarantee that we will ever progress to step 5, which is released to general population, under the step down program. And when I interviewed Jules Lobel of the Center for Constitutional Rights, he pointed out that even before a hunger strike was even threatened, the California Department of Corrections had not been doing a lot of evaluations around the step down program in Pelican Bay itself. And that's where it's most needed, because that's where the majority of people who are placed in the SHU on gang-related charges and allegations are being held. And a lot of them, again, have been held for years. Some over 500 people have spent more than 10 years in the SHU. And so why wouldn't you start with them first rather than going to all the different prisons?
I was interviewing Maya Shenwar, the executive director of Truthout, about this very subject. And she had said that one of the things that the prison, Pelican State Prison, had agreed to was a maximum, that it was either a maximum or a minimum, that there was, in terms of the time that you could spend in these shoes. And the problem is that it was kind of arbitrary, that right now you can spend, I think there was a minimum, maybe there was a minimum. There was a minimum time that you could spend at this point that they agreed to, but there's no maximum. So it becomes like you could be stuck in solitary confinement for more than a decade and perhaps your entire life. And there's no kind of review, and it seems very, very arbitrary. And it's understandable that, yes, you're in prison and you're serving time for a crime, but that extra layer that's put on some prisoners in the terms of solitary confinement, that's usually reserved for something that they have done that is really, really bad, that they need to be taken out of the general prison population and put into solitary confinement for a reason. And I think, from what I understand, the prisoners are saying, you have to give us better reasons than you are right now, because it's just, as I said, arbitrary at this point.
Based a lot on circumstantial evidence. So the evidence isn't person X walked up to person Y and assaulted them, or person X was caught trafficking drugs. It's that person X had a tattoo with a dragon on it and had a book, that also had a dragon on it. And then someone pointed the finger at person X, and now he's considered to be a gang associate or a gang member. And there is no actual behavior-based evidence that shows that person X is actually in a prison gang, let alone some top-tier member of a prison gang that's directing all these minions to do his bidding. It's, again, all circumstantial.
So as of this recording, the prison officials are saying they're not going to budge, that there's no negotiation on this. As far as they're concerned, the prisoners can engage in the hunger strike, but it's not going to put any kind of pressure on changes in the prison policy. Is that where things stand currently as of this recording?
As far as I know, that's where things stand currently. This past Friday, members of an outside mediation team, so it's advocates who have been working with SHU prisoners inside, have met with the California Department of Corrections. And so they saw this as perhaps a first step in negotiating with the Department of Corrections about problems in the step-down program and what kind of revisions would be made. And then, so people were hopeful. And then I believe it was over this weekend, the new head of the Department of Corrections, Jeffrey Beard, actually penned an editorial. I believe it was in the Los Angeles Times, basically reiterating what you said earlier, which is that people in the SHU are gang members, they're top-tier members, that hunger strikes are being called by prison gang members, and people are participating because they're afraid, not because there's actually real problems with the way that California incarcerates people, places them in solitary confinement, and basically keeps them there without any way to get out other than debriefing.
Okay, well, I think we have to leave it there, but thank you, Victoria, for for returning actually on the program and for updating us on what's going on in this current hunger strike at Pelican Bay State Prison in California.
Okay, and thanks for having me, and thanks for continuing to cover this.
Yeah, and thank you for watching Truthout Interviews. We'll be back next time. If you have a chance, subscribe to this video series. Try to produce these videos at least once a week. Thanks again for watching. I'm Ted Asregadoo.